Hey guys, welcome back to Stop Loss with Spencer, episode 14. Today's topic is the RFP timeline, okay? In previous videos, we've talked about the lock period. We've discussed the renewal process itself, maybe why you're getting a big renewal and what to do about it. But today we're going to dig into more specifics and more conscientious thought around the actual planning and strategy of the RFP itself. What due dates, what different phases the RFP cycle goes through, and how to take advantage of those phases in your client's best interest, okay? So for this particular example, we'll use a 1/1/2021 effective date. Of course, we all know we're entering into the fourth quarter again. I talked about it in my last video. This is where 60 some odd percentage of all renewals are on a 1/1 effective date. So obviously it feels pertinent to do it based on this time frame right here. So looking at a 9/15 for a potential release date that's September 15th. And the reason we want to potentially wait until after September 15th is so we can have 8 months of claims data in this plan year, which would be 120 days out from the effective date. We'll assume for this process right here that we'll be seeking a 90-day lock, sort of that standard 90 days out lock period. So we'll release our initial RFP publication around September 15th, which should include August claims, okay? So what do you include in that? Assuming we'll give the carriers about 2 weeks to meet our RFP request, ask any questions they may have, and make the determination of whether or not they want to quote. And we'll give them this information right here. This is not, again, exhaustive, but the main things that you need to include in that initial RFP so they know what to do to make their assessment. So of course you need to include a census with date of birth, date of hire, name, underlying medical plan design, the enrollment in that plan design, the zip code information, probably some sort of unique identifier for that claimant or that person as well. There's about 5 or 6 key elements that need to be included as a minimum for stop loss, and if you have questions about those, I'll be happy to answer those offline. But for the sake of the video, most of us know what a census is, okay, and what to include. We need to include claims data and some very specific parameters on that claims data. You want to provide claims data by month for specific and aggregate claims and based around the actual policy period or effective date period, okay? Sometimes I see where claims data is given on a calendar year basis, but unfortunately what that doesn't show is what claims are actually incurred and or potentially paid in that policy period. So you might be misrepresenting when the claims actually apply contract-wise if you're providing a calendar year basis for your claims and yet they're not on a calendar year basis for their stop loss renewal. Of course, this one is because it's a 1/1, but something definitely to keep in mind when you're doing an off-cycle renewal. Follow the policy period and give claims by month, okay? What is the underlying medical plan design? Of course, this is going to have an impact on the stop loss rate. So what is the current plan design? What is the projected, or what sort of plan design changes are we looking to implement for the next year? Make sure that you give that SPD or SBC around the underlying medical plans as well. Contract terms. This is the technical stuff within the stop loss contract you have in force again and what you're seeking. Spec deductible, do you have spec and ag coverage? What is the contract basis? What is the ag corridor? What enhancements do you want included on that stop loss quote? How many different options do you want to see? Just give them specific around the actual stop loss policy request itself, okay? Lock period, of course, I won't go over that again, but those of you who saw my lock period video, this is all what we're talking about, 120 days out, moving into hopefully a 90-day lock with this timeline right here. And then, of course, what TPA and network you're using. This is going to have a material impact on your quote. So if you're making TPA and or network changes for the coming year, you have to give them that information. You could see double-digit swings in pricing based on this combination alone, and even high double digits potentially if you're removing the network or doing some other sort of unique network arrangement type stuff like bundle pricing and direct contracting, reference-based pricing, etc. You could see a really significant difference, and every stop loss quote you have is tied to this TPA network combination, so you need to make sure you're getting exactly what you want and telling the carriers what to quote. And I mentioned cost containment kind of in this one, but what other cost containment plans are we implementing for next year? I could probably do a video specifically on this alone, but tell the carriers your strategy. You want to get them on board with what your long-term strategy is for this client, and that obviously revolves around cost containment. So now moving in, we've got our initial results back from the carrier market around October 1st. We're maybe narrowing down our options. Maybe we went to 10 carriers, 7 of them quoted, and we're going to focus on the 3 or 4 most competitive. So we're going to go back to those carriers with updated claims data. So what I mean by that, of course, is that same sort of basis of spec and ag claims by month, but they want to see the change from August claims to September claims and make sure that they're seeing how this case is actually trending appropriately. And then we dig deeper because we're obviously trying to firm our offers up at this point, so we need to provide more in-depth detail around claims. So that would be things like case management notes, pending and denied report, pre-certification reports for imminent maybe procedures that are on the horizon. And then the 50% of spec report. This is crucial, okay? So just because you gave them large claims doesn't mean you've given them large claims down to a threshold that's adequate to make their final determination. So usually they ask for 50% of spec. So assuming $100,000 spec, they want to see any and all large claims above $50,000 sort of as an example. As you get really, really high in the deductibles, they'll probably actually keep that threshold lower, just actuarial reasons. But general rule of thumb, you need to provide a 50% of spec report. You probably have already included it, but just in case I didn't specify that, make sure this is one of those reports that they're going to absolutely have to see to make a firming determination. Any proposed changes from that initial release to the secondary, and then of course we're trying to get this case firm. So assuming we gave them all the data they need, a few carriers are happy, they really want to get aggressive and go after this case, they've given you a firm offer, maybe they've sharpened their pencils a little bit. Now we've got firm quotes and we have a shot clock or a timeline, basically a deadline that is now imminent because again, these firm quotes will include some sort of expiration date. So now we'll move up from firm and we're going into basically the final phase. It doesn't mean there's not maybe some last minute negotiations that can happen, but this is where we're actually trying to get decisions or elections made by our client. Of course, again, general rule of thumb, obviously your client, your individual client in the timeline and how quick or slow they are to make decisions or whether or not you're making sweeping changes or no changes at all can affect that decision-making timeline. But let's assume we've now gotten enough information and our client wants to make a decision. We're going with ABC, MGU, we're really great stop-loss carrier, okay? And they've made their election. Well, what happens after that? Then we're going to start the binding process, okay? So what they're immediately going to ask for is you to fill out most likely a disclosure form. There are some circumstances where they're not required if you're renewing with that same carrier and or if maybe there's certain TPAs that they have arrangements with that they can use other reports in lieu of this disclosure form, but let's just assume you got to fill out a disclosure form. What that is they're going to ask you for very specific diagnosis codes or procedural codes to find out did they miss anything in their claims analysis. They're going to ask for very specific information, and you as a broker and your client will need to make sure that you've divulged all of the pertinent information. You're not hiding anything necessarily, or you haven't overlooked something, because of course this has exposure potential if you misrepresented something. So they're going to ask for a disclosure form, assuming of course that they sign off and everything looks good. They're going to ask for you to sign paperwork as well, whether or not they require wet signatures. I mean, insurance is still kind of slow to react to the markets. So they may not use a DocuSign. You may still have to actually print off, sign, scan, and send back to the carrier. But these are the two things that effectively will lock in your stop loss with that carrier for that year. And then you just sort of start the implementation process after that, which would mean a final census after enrollment has been, true enrollment has happened, and an updated plan document for that coming policy period, which will probably be a couple months after the effective date. So that is the RFP timeline. Again, I don't think this gets enough emphasis. I really wanted to pull this apart and spend a specific video solely discussing the RFP timeline. Think about this. Plan ahead. Pull your carriers into this discussion so they understand expectations and meeting timelines. If we all work collaboratively together, especially with your internal teams and your marketing people that are responsible for this, I think it's a win-win-win ultimately in the end because we have a much more conscientious and proactive RFP process than maybe a reactive one where we're just releasing and, finger in the air, right? Which way is the wind blowing? Hopefully we get this done. Plan ahead, have better outcomes.